Dear participants, please note that the meeting will start with a bit of delay. We'll be able to start in about 5 to 10 minutes. Thank you for your patience. In the meantime, if you want to test your audio and your video, we can assist you with this. Just let us know by writing in the chat or by raising your hand on Zoom. Thank you. Okay, I hear that the US delegation would like to test audio and video. Please, if you can deactivate your microphone so we can test it. So if you can unmute yourself.
Hi there, can you hear us?
Yes, we can hear you and we can see you. Perfect. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, who is talking? I cannot see any video. This is it. Hello? If anyone wishes to test the microphone and the video, please let me know. Thank you.
Уважаемые участники, встреча начнется через 5 минут. До начала заседания у вас есть возможность проверить свое видео и аудио. Благодарим вас.
Dear colleagues, honorable members, I'm very pleased to welcome you to the 2022 winter meeting session of the OSCE General Committee on Economic Affairs, Science, Technology and Environment. Thank you all for tuning in, either in person or via Zoom, for this important committee session. First, allow me a few technical announcements before we officially start. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and broadcasted live on the OSCE social media platforms and website. Simultaneous interpretation into all 6 OSCE languages, English, French, German, Italian, Russian, and Spanish, is provided for the meeting. For participants in Hofburg, please select your preferred interpretation channel using the provided audio equipment. For participants joining us online, please choose the language of interpretation at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Kindly note that an advanced list of speakers for each agenda item has been duly received from our virtual desk office. Additional requests to take the floor must be written in the chat, specifying your name, organization, and the language of your intervention. To ensure a smooth experience, I kindly ask all participants to mute their microphones when not speaking. It's very important. Likewise, please unmute your microphone only when the floor is given. I kindly ask all speakers to limit their intervention to 2 minutes. This is also very important during the debate, thereby enabling a sound exchange of ideas and the timely conclusion of our meeting by 3:30 sharp due to the subsequent session of the 3rd committee. Without further delay, I will proceed with our agenda. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, esteemed colleagues, first of all, let me start with the thought that these are very difficult days. We are all appalled by the news coming from Ukraine. Large-scale invasions of free, independent countries should never be considered as legitimate means to pursue national security interests. My full solidarity goes to our Vice President, Vice Chair, Artur Gerasimov, and the people of Ukraine. And at the end of the day, those suffering the most will be innocent civilians on all sides. While we decide to go on with our agenda, as originally planned, clearly we can't ignore what is happening around us. So, looking at today's program, soon we'll be hearing from Mrs. Gudrun Kugler, who as rapporteur of the committee will highlight her areas of focus for this year's report. We will also listen carefully to Ambassador Igli Hasani, coordinator of the OSCE Economic and Environmental Activities. His presentation will fit into today's debate on the work of the OSCE and of the CPA in advancing a common approach in promoting economic and environmental security. Nowadays, we need it more than ever. And I'm also pleased to welcome Mrs. Katarzyna Wieniawska-Rosik, head of the second dimension unit for the 2022 OSCE Polish Chairmanship. Thank you, who kindly stepped in to brief us on the second dimension priorities for this year. Finally, we will hold a special debate on human trafficking in a globalized economy. Don't forget that human trafficking is the second business all over the world today. And as a serious crime and grave affront to human dignity, human trafficking undermines our security and weakens our economies, being profoundly intertwined with our development approach. And I am honored that Mr. Valian Ricci, OSCE Special Representative and Coordinator for Combating Trafficking in Human Beings, and Mr. Christopher Smith, OSCE Special Representative on Human Trafficking Issues, agreed to shed light on this complex issue. And I am also pleased that we are a sort of gender parity in this session. Dear colleagues, the concept of economic and environmental security is increasingly key against the background of the latest developments. This is important also to today. And the disruptive effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on growth and development is also evident. Against this background, promoting security and stability in the OSCE area through sustainable economic recovery from the COVID pandemic, it's clear that it's a top priority for all our countries. And as a matter of fact, we will need to invest heavily on a green recovery. We will need to accelerate deployment of green technologies, leveraging technology to promote socio-economic change for the benefit of all. Mitigating the impact of climate change and environmental degradation on the security, health, and wealth of our citizens has become a priority of the entire international community. The global economy could lose 10% of its total economic value by 2050 due to climate change, not to mention the damages caused by extreme weather, events, pollution, social unrest, and mass migratory movements. And let's not speak about Ukraine because the effects will be clear in the coming weeks and months. Simply put, there can be no global security without economic and environmental security. For instance, the connection between climate change, energy, geopolitics, and citizens' well-being is now clearer than ever. Equally, pollution impacts people's lives directly, causing millions of premature deaths and other severe illnesses each year. Ultimately, the pandemic has opened our eyes to many critical economic and environmental challenges affecting our daily security. I'm therefore proud that the OSCE Second Committee is taking an active approach in linking economic recovery, green transition, and environmental protection considerations. Now more than ever, we must lead by example, fellow colleagues. We have to urgently review our policies and upgrade our behaviors in order to ensure more fair, sustainable, and secure development across the OSCE region. It's time to act. This is why since last July, I have frequently met with the Vice Chair, the Rapporteur, and Director of our committee to coordinate our efforts and keep them high on the Assembly's internal and external agenda. In October last year, I represented the PA at the pre-COP parliamentary meeting in Rome. And you know that the COP26 in Glasgow has been widely labeled as the world's last chance to tackle climate change. And I took the opportunity to reiterate the climate public health security nexus and stress the key role of parliamentarians in monitoring the implementation of climate-related commitments. To highlight the important work we are doing at the OSCE PA, with 323 MPs representing the security needs and expectation of over 1 billion citizens, don't forget that, our second committee bureau, together with our special representatives on sustainable development goals and Arctic issues, issued a super timely parliamentary plea for resolute climate action on November last year. The plea exhorted OSCE governments to do more in mitigation and adapting to climate change, but also underlined the important role of parliamentarians in this context. With our green transition for just starting, it is critical to build strong public support for a much needed energy revolution and truly sustainable carbon neutral development model, a model in which environmental, economic, social, and public health factors are given equal attention. With this in mind, we held a parliamentary web dialogue on the clean energy revolution and its implication for the OSCE region in February, weeks ago, to exchange views with the leading experts in this context. So this is a systemic shift that will have geopolitical and economic effects that go far beyond the energy sector. Needless to stress that our political will is the most important asset, even more now, as gas prices are skyrocketing due to the conflict in Ukraine. I'm also delighted to report that our committee has further expanded its network of collaboration with leading international actors across the OSCE region, including important international organizations such as the International Energy Agency and the World Energy Council, as well as leading scientific institutions such as the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies. These partnerships allow us to be more operational in our work and strengthen the policy science interface of the Assembly. As a case in point, I am pleased to announce that the OSCE has officially joined the United Nations Mediterranean Commission on Sustainable Development of the Barcelona Convention since January 2022. Acting as a forum for sharing experience and peer leading, the Commission assists contracting parties in protecting the environment and promoting sustainable development policies in the Mediterranean region. To conclude, I will work hard to ensure the Parliamentary Assembly becomes a privileged platform to exchange relevant experience, promote a greater understanding of the complex issues at stake, and last but not least, develop innovative policy guidance as appropriate. So we must act now to build a safe future for our citizens. We are really running out of time, and thank you all for your attention. And moving immediately to next agenda item, I will now give the floor to our rapporteur, Mrs. Gudrun Kugler, who will share her views and ideas for the upcoming annual session in Birmingham. Dear Gudrun, thanks again for your active engagement and genuine commitment. I'm very keen to hear you, to hear your thoughts about the key environmental and economic security challenges faced by our countries and citizens. You have the floor, Gudrun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for your remarks. And dear colleagues, thank you for being here and on the screens. Let me first say something about the conflict in Ukraine. Wars are for the history books and not for the 21st century. And people are made for freedom and they are made for care and for love, but they are not made for killing and destruction. And our Vice Chair, Artur Gerasimov, who is not here with us today because he's in Kiev, sent us a message this morning saying, here, full-scale war, including aviation and missiles. And I don't know if he hears us now, but Artur, we are with you and your entire people. And maybe the wish to destabilize is not only referring to the Ukraine, but much further. So maybe by focusing on the key issues of this committee, we further peace and we further the possibility of change for the better. And this is why I think it is legitimate to work even in these days on the issues that we have to deal with in this committee. As you know, the second committee focuses on environment, economy, science, and technology under the aspect of security. And even more today, we can say that all of these aspects are vital for sustainable development for nowadays, but in the future to come as well. And this is why I think the second committee should and could rightly be called the Future Committee. And this Future Committee has a strong voice, and this voice are all the members, all the parliamentarians who can carry the findings of the committee to their respective parliaments. And in our preparations in the last 6 months, where the Bureau, the leadership of the committee has worked intensely together, always and ever again, we were reminded that parliaments are the drivers in the seat for change, and that it is our role as parliamentarians to advocate for change, work with our governments, and cooperate and enhance the dialogue in the entire region. And in doing so, we are not alone. We have very strong partners, and those partners are also within the OSCE structures. I'm very grateful that we have high representatives here with us today in our committee meeting. We are surrounded by many experts and stakeholders with whom we can and should join forces to maximize our impact. And in the last 6 months, as I was already preparing the outline of my report, I worked with many of you, with many of the special representatives of OSCE PA, but also of many special representatives of OSCE. And in hearing their and your expertise, I built the outline of my report, which I would now like to present to you only in bullet points in order to safeguard our time commitment today. Within our first area, economy, I would just like to reiterate what Chair Pons has already said about the economic consequences of the pandemic, which have affected the entire region. How do we recover from the pandemic economically? How can we make sure not to squander the opportunity? This will be a key focus of the report. But we will also look into pre-pandemic issues. For example, how can we combat corruption and support good governance? And in this regard, I highly appreciated my conversations with Special Representative of OSCE Anita Ramasastri, and also Special Representative of OSCE PA on fighting corruption, Irene Karalambidis, who will be organizing a major conference on this topic soon. Another issue I would like to look at in my report is the demographic challenge, as well as migration flows. I did appreciate my conversation with our special representative of the OSCE PA on elderly issues, Paola Taverna, who is here with us in the room today. I would also like to look into geopolitical independence and economic security through development cooperation and sustainable development. And the issue of trafficking is at the intersection of economy and technology. And in focusing on this issue, I think it is a key for the parliamentarians to also learn and hear about the topic of supply chains that we will be hearing a bit more about today. I'm very glad that Special Representative of OSCE Val Ritchie, as well as of OSCE PA Chris Smith, will be with us in the specialized part of this session in order to raise an issue that intersects with many of the topics that we work on in our committee. The second large area is environment. And here, as our chair has already pointed out, we have sent a letter to Glasgow in November. And the letter was drafted amongst the leadership of the committee. It took a lot of minute work, and it was aided by the Special Representative of OSCE PA, Bryndis Haraldsdottir, Special Representative on Arctic issues, who is also here today in Vienna, and Special Representative of OSCE PA on Sustainable Development Goals, Askar Shakirov. And this letter, and you have all seen the letter, will be, of course, abbreviated in its main contents in the report. A second element in the area of environment is very important. It has also been mentioned, is energy transition. On February 4th, our committee held a parliamentary web dialogue on the clean energy revolution and its implication for the OSCE region. And there was many people who participated, who discussed, who gave their expertise. And it was very clear in this meeting that energy security is a true bridging factor between economic and environmental security, and that it has huge repercussions on both. It was firmly established that we need to achieve a greening of the energy sector by urgently reducing emissions and by reducing our reliance on depletable forms of energy. Thereby, we will contribute to the protection of the environment and also to the health of our citizens. And I would like to remind you of the detailed work that this committee has done a year ago on the protection from pollution in order to protect health of citizens. We are building upon the work that has been done in the report that is to come. And while we speak about climate change, protecting the environment, and energy transition, we must always keep in mind, especially as members of parliaments, that we cannot allow new forms of energy poverty. Access to affordable energy is a great achievement of modern society, and we must not leave anyone behind. We must also keep in mind that climate change must be tackled globally. Now, in a third and last area, we are going to look into the issue of science and technology. And as you know, science and technology are key allies in the change which we seek to achieve. We need a strong science policy interface. This is key. At the same time, we must not overlook that there are potential threats, security threats, within the development of new technologies and artificial intelligence. These things have fundamentally changed our lives. And I enjoyed very much the conversation I had about this with our special representative on disinformation and propaganda, Mr. Oscar Mina. And in this regard, I think it is important to focus also on how to alleviate possible negative consequences. We must remember that digital processes must be backed up in essential supply and critical infrastructure. We must also remember that decision-taking should continue to be done by humans, only supported but not biased by machine judgment. Now, my dear colleagues, on these and many other topics, I will be working together with our secretariat, and I do ask all of you to communicate to me your inputs on the topics that this committee works on. I will take careful notes of our debate today, and I will be also happy to receive your suggestions by any form of communication. I would like to thank all of you to think and work deeply on the issues that we cover in this future committee, because it is about our common future. I would like to thank our president, Margareta Zederfeld, our chair, Pere Pons, as well as our vice chair, Artur Gerasimov, for the continuous support on working on these key questions. And I would also like to mention our tireless secretariat, many of who are now present in this room, for their absolutely outstanding and tremendous work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kugler. And I think you listed all the items very briefly. You mentioned the fair recovery, you mentioned the climate change challenge, you mentioned the energy transition, you mentioned also technology, and then you link it to several challenges as security, as affordability. You link it also with our daily life, and also you mentioned also the idea of global challenge. Then I think you put all the elements together to go for an excellent debate. Thank you again, Mrs. Kugler, and as a rapporteur of the second committee. And I would like to go further with our winter meeting. We always offered a good opportunity to interact with the OSCE executive structures on the latest developments related to our common areas of work. Today's meeting, Rapporteur, shall be no exception, and I'm pleased that our committee continues to benefit from excellent cooperation with the OSCE executive structures. As a case in point, I'm proud that our constructive engagement has been duly reflected in the landmark of the Ministerial Council decision on strengthening cooperation to address the challenges caused by climate change in 2021. And this is a key focus of our work, and the opportunities to synergize are enormous. In fact, the overall topic of today's meetings is right on target. We actively seek opportunities to further complement our agendas while bringing more visibility and continuity to our common efforts. So now, to accelerate the debate, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Hasani, the newly appointed coordinator of the OSCE Economic and Environmental Activities, and his office is mandated to support OSCE participating states in implementing commitments in the economic and environmental dimension. Prior to this post, Ambassador Hasani served as a chairperson of the OSCE Permanent Council during Albania's chairmanship in 2020. Your Excellency, thank you very much for being with us today, and you have the floor.
Mr. Chairperson, distinguished members of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to address the General Committee on Economic Affairs, Science, Technology and Environment. As this is the first time I address this distinguished audience in my current capacity as the coordinator of the OSCE Economic and Environmental Activities, I would like to pay tribute to the critical role of the Parliamentary Assembly in addressing and advancing the overall objectives of the OSCE, including in the second dimension. I also wish to recall the well-established and fruitful interaction existing between the OSCE and the Parliamentary Assembly. Our cooperation in the framework of the Economic and Environmental Forum, including the meetings of the EC or the annual EDIM, goes back a long way. In this regard, I'm grateful to Dr. Gudrun Kugler, the rapporteur of this distinguished General Committee, for skillfully moderating the second session of the first preparatory meeting of the forum last week. Your contribution, Dr. Kugler, was highly appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, this 21st OSCE Parliamentary Assembly winter meeting offers a good occasion to update you on some of the main areas of our engagement this year. During the first meeting of the Economic and Environmental Committee at the beginning of January, I presented the draft work plan of the office, highlighting how we plan to support the efforts of participating states to strengthen their ability to address economic, social, and environmental aspects of security. In line with our mandate, we will strive to facilitate dialogue and support cooperation in the economic and environmental dimensions as primary tools to promote sustainable economic growth, build confidence, and prevent conflicts among participating states. As in previous years, the office will provide assistance, policy advice, and operational support to the current and incoming chairs, the participating states, and the Secretary General in the framework of the EEF cycles, the meetings of the Economic and Environmental Committee, and also into the EDIM. Our assistance is demand-driven and will be based exclusively on the specific needs of our constituents and their national authorities. In this framework, we will strive to ensure the sustainability and long-term impact of each initiative in relevant domains, such as the cooperation to adapt to climate change and mitigate its social, economic, and environmental effects, good governance and its ample portfolio on preventing and combating corruption and money laundering, including the using of digital tools and new technologies, prevention and mitigation of environmental threats to security through transboundary water cooperation and good water governance, and at promoting sound management of hazardous waste, and also promotion of dialogue and cooperation on energy security, with a particular focus on the protection of energy networks, the promotion of renewable and sustainable energy, and energy efficiency. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's Economic and Environmental Forum process has received a lot of attention and interest from the OSCE participating states, the executive structures, and relevant partner organizations. This is due to the timelines and relevance of the theme, carefully prepared by our Polish friends, dedicated to promoting security and stability in the OSCE area through sustainable economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. We have a unique opportunity to leverage the OSCE's potential to advance post-pandemic sustainable growth and development. And to achieve this objective, we must increase OSCE-wide synergies, including with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, and join efforts with partner organizations who have a solid track record in the areas covered by our mandate. Let us reflect, for instance, on the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic. No organization or country can tackle them alone. Same for the serious economic, social, and environmental consequences of climate change, not least those stemming from corruption or other governance-related misconducts. Their magnitude is just too big to be handled alone. To effectively address these complex, multifaceted phenomena, all stakeholders must work together, aiming to global solutions and concerted efforts. In other words, we must increase common approaches and join forces with multiple stakeholders, such as the private sector, the scientific community, international organizations, and the civil society. Here, allow me to focus very briefly, but very importantly, on climate change, perhaps the most pressing challenges of our times, except what is going on recently this week. In its most recent report, the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned that climate change is intensifying. However, it also reassured that human behaviors and actions could still influence the future course of the climate, which leaves us a great deal of optimism. As the OSCE Secretary General put it, the good news is that we at the OSCE are not standing idle on this topic. The recently adopted Ministerial Council decision on strengthening cooperation to address the challenges caused by climate change is a key milestone in our efforts to take action to tackle collectively this phenomenon. The decision calls on the participating states to intensify dialogue and cooperation towards climate resilience, adaptation and mitigation, including through risk analysis, early warning, joint research and investment, and exchange of information. Distinguished parliamentarians, I firmly believe in your active and key role to support the implementation of the OSCE's mandate in the area of climate change and more in general in the economic and environmental dimension. Being elected by citizens and consequently accountable to them, you are the most entitled to keep the issues we're facing high on your respective national legislative agendas. Take the issue of preventing and fighting corruption to make just another example that is extremely pertinent to our respective mandates. Here, the legislative branch of governments can establish legal mechanisms capable of guaranteeing high standard in terms of good governance, transparency, and rule of law. These in turn can increase the integrity of public service delivery and foster the active participation of civil society in social and economic development processes. Let me emphasize that the OSCE, through the Office of the Coordinator for Economic and Environmental Activities, is well positioned to support these functions in different participating states through the provision of technical expertise, capacity building initiatives, and exchanges of experiences, but definitely also best practices. I wish to conclude by reiterating our readiness to enhance cooperation with the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly in the economic and environmental dimension. We look forward to concrete engagement in areas of mutual interest in the near future, and it has been a great pleasure to share with you these important elements of our comprehensive work program for this year, and I stand ready to answer to any comments and questions that you might have. Thank you for your attention, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ambassador, and I think you mentioned many items, but I will just underline the idea of this joint challenge we have as a parliamentarians, as members also of the international community in this enormous challenge on the climate change. So thank you very much again, and dear colleagues, as previously announced, I am now pleased to give the floor to Ms. Katarina Winienska-Rozik, Head of the Economic and Environmental Dimension Unit for the 2020-2022 OSCE Polish Chairmanship, who will briefly inform us about their economic and environmental priorities for this year. Dear Katarina, the floor is yours, and thank you for being today here with us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Distinguished members of the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this distinguished forum today in the capacity of the Polish OSCE Chairmanship 2022. As the chairman in office expressed yesterday during the winter meeting of the Parliamentary Assembly of OSCE, the OSCE was designed to prevent another war on the European continent. Since the very beginning of the Polish chairmanship, our goal has been to seek compromise and facilitate dialogue between parties in conflict, taking into account the humanitarian impact on people living in conflict-affected areas. The ongoing tragedy in Ukraine, caused by Russia's unprovoked invasion, has a grave influence on civilians. An unspeakable act unfolds before our eyes. The chairmanship remains ready to work to stop the war, prevent any future ones, and return to Helsinki culture. Security and stability are key to sustainable economic growth, which is the foundation of prosperity and development. We will continue to utilize the second dimension as a platform, trying to restore dialogue and address crucial economic and environmental issues among participating states. Distinguished participants, while taking part in today's meeting of General Committee of Economic and Science, Technology and Environmental Affairs, I would like to thank you for giving us this opportunity to present Polish OSCE Chairmanship's priorities in the economic and environmental dimension as well as giving you an overview of the activities and goals planned until now. We are convinced that our close cooperation with the representatives of the Parliamentary Assembly may be a crucial factor to attain fruitful discussions and organize successful events in the second dimension in 2022. The Polish chairmanship is looking forward to continuing this path together. On this occasion, allow me to echo what already our Ambassador Hasani mentioned and thank Dr. Kugler, Rapporteur in the second dimension of the Parliamentary Assembly, for taking the role as the moderator at the first preparatory meeting of the Economic and Environmental Forum last week. Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate this opportunity to learn about the engagements of your committee that we regard as complementary to our priorities in the second dimension for this year. Poland's priorities in the second dimension are reflected by the overreaching theme of this year's EF cycle, which is titled Promoting Security and Stability in the OSCE Area through Sustainable Economic Recovery from the COVID pandemic. We still believe that the way towards a sustainable and inclusive recovery can only be achieved by close cooperation and dialogue. Last week's discussions during the first preparatory meeting of the Economic and Environmental Forum highlighted ways to incorporate investment, entrepreneurship, human capital development strategies, anti-corruption measures, as well as transport and trade in the crucial strive to overcome current economic, social, and environmental challenges, as well as to enhance resilience in the post-COVID world. We hope to continue our debate in the second preparatory meeting of the Economic and Environmental Forum on 23rd and 24th of May in Łódź by further addressing the pressing environmental issues we are facing. In this context, the focus should be on the question on how to make our economies green and environmentally sound in the long run. This includes topics like the promotion of digital and technological innovations, the protection of environment and sustainable use of natural resources, as well as cooperation in the fields of energy efficiency and renewable energy sources. We hope that during this year, our meetings will provide an adequate platform for the exchange of knowledge and best practices amongst participating states and experts in those fields. After all, we must consider that we can only reach the goal of reducing the environmental footprint in the OSCE area and to achieve climate neutrality by tackling those issues together. To sum up our discussions on the 8th and 9th of September, the concluding meeting of the Economic and Environmental Forum in Prague will provide us with the chance to discuss way forward in the second dimension. As we celebrate the 30th anniversary of the forum this year, we shall have the chance to reflect on the achievements of the second dimension over the past 3 decades, as well as its integral role in the OSCE comprehensive security structure. Additionally, the topics of the Economic and Environmental Committee meetings in 2022, which were prepared together with the Austrian committee chair, were chosen to provide complementary considerations on shared priorities of participating states in the second dimension. Our next committee meeting in March shall be dedicated to our most recent commitments on challenges caused by climate change. But we shall also discuss topics like digital aspects of youth education, sustainable management of natural resources, as well as promoting sustainable agriculture during this year. Considering the Economic and Environmental Dimension implementation meeting in October, Poland's aim is to keep the main priority of our previous Swedish chairmanship in the second dimension high on the agenda. Being aware of the significance that women's economic empowerment bears for many participating states, including Poland, we plan to devote the meeting of the implementation of the Ministerial Council decisions covering elements dedicating to women's economic participation, with the aim to add extra value in this important debate, to address serious economic, social, and environmental impacts of COVID-19 pandemic for our ever-changing societies. The Polish chairmanship 2022 focuses on efforts to increase resilience and enhance stability of our region. We hope that through the year, we will be able to fulfill our role as chairmanship in the second dimension, fostering dialogue and cooperation. We look forward to your support and collaboration in this difficult endeavor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, dear Katarina. I would like to just retain one idea for the debate, this idea of how to make economies greener. And at the same time, as a members of parliaments of countries, how to catalyze this change and how this affects on our populations. How are we going to make this transition fair with no one left behind? And I think this is an opportunity to discuss that today. So thank you very much. And I think that, dear colleagues, I would like to open the debate among the ones who have requested the floor. And I encourage everyone to make the best out of the little time available. So please be brief and constructive. We have several, we have a list, more than 10 requests. So I ask you to be brief again, and the countdown timer visible on the screen will indicate your remaining time for your intervention. So once it becomes red, please conclude. So I call first Mr. Asai Guliev, Vice President of the OSCE, Special Representative on the Southeast Europe and Head of the Delegation of Azerbaijan. Mr. Asai, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, dear Chair, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me thank all our rapporteurs as well as speakers for their excellent presentations. And I do appreciate particularly the Polish priorities regarding the green energy and the green economy, as well as the digital technology that really need to be applied as much as possible. Taken into consideration those areas that really are the priority for all the OSCE member countries, I would like to make a small announcement on that regard and inform you that under the framework of the Helsinki Plus 50 initiatives call for action, Azerbaijani delegation in close cooperation with the OSCE Secretariat as well as the coordinator and the high-level expert Ambassador Zanier are preparing a very important event conference in Baku, dedicated to the role of the OSCE in promoting security and stability through green economy, connectivity, and sustainable development. I do believe that this is, as I said, this is full in line with all these commitments as well as the priorities of the Parliamentary Assembly. Azerbaijan is well positioned for transforming to green economy. Recently, my country has adopted strategies regarding the building of smart city, smart village concept, as well as green energy. So my Azerbaijan intended to continue fulfill its key role in the region according to the current trends and secure the connectivity in our region. The conference will be held in capital of Azerbaijan in Baku on 27-28 April. And after that, the conference participants will have the chance to visit the region, have a field visit to get acquainted with the best practice of Azerbaijan in place. We are looking forward to have the plenary or the panel discussions. First day in Baku, as I said, second day visiting to the region. We hope that 3 members of each delegation and plus 1 staff will be eligible to attend, and this possibility will be created. The other due information, dear Chair, will be circulated in due time. I thank you your time and invite all of the delegations without any restriction to attend this important conference. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. And again, I would ask you to respect the time. So now we have, I give the floor to Ms. Paola Taverna from the Italian delegation, and I also announced that she will be followed by Nadir Jumaev from the Uzbekistan delegation. Thank you very much. Paola, hai la parola.
Grazie Presidente Pons e grazie alla Rapporteur Gudrun Kugler per il suo lavoro e gli spunti interessanti. Sarò breve. Nell'incontro avuto con la Rapporteur Kugler abbiamo potuto approfondire molte sfide del futuro che saranno determinate dal cambiamento demografico. Con grande soddisfazione ho rilevato che anche questa Commissione è preoccupata per la denatalità e l'invecchiamento che riguardano molti nostri paesi, soprattutto in Europa. Questo cambiamento demografico cambierà radicalmente le nostre società con un impatto decisivo sul welfare. Parlando con Gudrun abbiamo constatato ad esempio come in diverse zone rurali nell'Austria si stia verificando un calo demografico molto forte che comporta la chiusura di scuole, strutture pubbliche, depopolamento e conseguente impoverimento di quelle aree. L'integrazione delle persone longeve in nuovi modelli abitativi nella cui gestione siano coinvolte le nuove generazioni e le tecnologie digitali potrebbe essere una delle soluzioni per questo problema. Questo è solo un esempio di come il confronto tra problematiche e soluzioni in paesi differenti possa trovare punti di incontro creativi su cui nella sostanza e nella pratica impostare la cooperazione internazionale. Concludo rinnovando gli auguri di buon lavoro al Presidente, alla Rapporteur e a tutti noi con un pensiero speciale per i colleghi ucraini. Grazie.
Grazie. Nadir Jumaev has the floor. If he's not connected, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Yara Sachs, member of the delegation of Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, esteemed colleagues and parliamentarians. It's a pleasure to join you today, sadly for the second time virtually rather than in person. I'd like to speak about the topic of environmental and economic security in the context of two intersecting crises: climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. I spoke to this committee last summer on the impacts of climate change while in the Canadian province of British Columbia, temperatures reached nearly 50 degrees Celsius, comparable to the hottest parts of the Sahara Desert, impacting the health of residents and further exacerbating the spread of devastating forest fires. This heat wave occurred amid one of the hottest years ever recorded globally. According to European Union's Copernicus Climate Change Service, the average global temperature in 2021 was more than 1.1 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial average, or the fifth warmest year on record. Just 4 months later, heavy rains and flooding in the Pacific Northwest resulted in significant impacts in infrastructure through flooding and heavy rains, including our highways and railways and transport highways being disrupted and supply chains also being impacted, while the local agricultural sector and the loss of livestock supplies and livelihoods and homes were lost. As UN Secretary General Guterres said, climate change is a crisis multiplier. In addition to its effects on the natural environment, climate change affects food production, destroys critical infrastructure, and displaces our communities. We also need to consider that these impacts through COVID-19 and the climate crisis have impacted the SDG focus and socioeconomic and environmental objectives many of us have put forward. The UN's 2021 SDG report indicates that approximately 120 million people were pushed back into extreme poverty in 2020. This is something we must address collaboratively. And while these and other troubling reports present a picture of the state of global efforts to combat climate change are disturbing, there are also hopeful signs. At the COP26 Glasgow in last November, more than 100 countries cut their methane emissions by 30% by 2030. World leaders also agreed to phase down coal-fired power plants and eliminate most fossil fuel subsidies. These are significant accomplishments and were realized by working together as an international community. I look forward to the discussions of the 7 members of the OSCE and all of our parliamentarians in an effort to combat climate change and look how we together can steer past the COVID-19 pandemic into recovery to a more environmentally sustainable and economically inclusive path. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear colleague. Now I would like to try if Mr. Artur Gerasimov, Vice Chair of the Second Committee, Deputy Head of the Delegation of Ukraine, is available. If not, I will give the floor to Mr. Christos Senekis from the Delegation of Cyprus. Mr. Senekis, you have the floor. You have the microphone mute. You have to unmute your microphone, Mr. Senekis.
Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear colleagues, at the moment, our thoughts are with Ukrainian people, which is suffering from the attack launched by Russia yesterday morning. We stand by them, respecting the territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine. Cyprus, as a country which is still divided after 47 years, experiencing the painful consequences of the Turkish invasion in 1974, the continued military occupation of part of its territory and the displacement of a large part of its population, supports the efforts for an immediate cessation by Russia of all military actions in Ukraine and return to democratic dialogue. Of course, there is a deep concern about the economic impact of the escalation of the Ukrainian crisis, especially on the energy level, following the freezing of the licensing of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline at a time when Europe is facing a sharp rise in energy prices and consequent inflationary pressures, which have dramatically increased the cost of living. At the same time, international financial markets have already fallen sharply as a result of dramatic developments in Ukraine, while major upheavals in the global supply chain have already started. Economic and environmental security being an integral part of the OSCE's fundamental comprehensive security concept. Therefore, this organization must play its due role towards a European security architecture that effectively addresses current challenges and create conditions of stability, being a necessary precondition for economic growth. Republic of Cyprus, for its part, has been pursuing its energy program within its exclusive economic zone in strict compliance with the law of the sea, with the aim of turning energy into a catalyst for regional peace and cooperation, and of highlighting the importance of the Eastern Mediterranean region as an alternative energy option for Europe. Regrettably, Turkey continues unabated its gunboat diplomacy and violations of Cyprus' exclusive economic zone, further exacerbating tension in this highly sensitive region. In addition to that, Cyprus has undertaken an initiative to coordinate a regional response to climate change, particularly affecting the Eastern Mediterranean and Middle East region. The said initiative will support actions to address the devastating impact of climate change, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and promote clean energy. Thank you for the organization of this event.
Thank you, Christos. And before giving the floor to Maria Karapetian, member of the Delegation of Armenia, I would like to retry with Mr. Nodir Shumayev, member of the Delegation of Uzbekistan. Thank you.
Дорогие коллеги, в первую очередь хотел бы поприветствовать всех участвующих в парламентской ассамблее ОБСЕ. Стоит отметить, что парламентская ассамблея ОБСЕ – это площадка для развития межпарламентских связей, и в этой связи хочу подтвердить нашу заинтересованность в углублении сотрудничества с парламентской ассамблеей ОБСЕ. Я хотел бы сказать пару слов о необходимости принятия важных мер в сфере образования Афганистана, так как образование является сейчас одним из самых важных факторов развития Афганистана. Как говорится, для capacity building, то есть для наращивания потенциала, мы должны заняться подготовкой и переподготовкой специалистов в данной сфере. Мы должны совместными усилиями перезапустить и начать работу в сфере образования Афганистана. Необходимо отметить, что Узбекистан уже ведет работу в этом направлении. И считаю, нужно проинформировать и о проделанных работах, о том, что очень много молодежи Афганистана обучается в высших учебных заведениях Узбекистана. Также было бы уместно рассказать об образовательном центре по обучению афганских граждан при Министерстве высшего и среднего образования Республики Узбекистан в городе Термез. Узбекистан готов к сотрудничеству с ОБСЕ. Мы готовы работать в этой сфере во имя мира. Считаем это очень важно. И готовы обсудить с ОБСЕ все вопросы в этом направлении. Также все технические детали. У нас с Афганистаном общие угрозы. Ситуация в Афганистане – это не только проблема Центральной Азии, это и глобальная угроза для всего мира. Спасибо за внимание. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Maria Karapetyan has the floor, and then she will be followed by Mr. Denis Karas, member of the delegation of Belarus.
Thank you, Chair Pons. Dear colleagues, I would like to thank Ambassador Hasani and Madam Raunig for their addresses. I would also like to thank the Rapporteur of the third committee, Dr. Gudrun Kugler, for presenting her vision for the report of the third committee. I was also present at the February 4 web dialogue on the clean energy revolution and appreciate very much how Dr. Kugler collected the input from all of the participants, and I'm sure that will be the case with today's meeting. I would like to share how I see Armenia's progress on today's agenda item. Armenia is not a fossil fuel producer, and the transition to carbon neutrality is very naturally a principle of our aims for energy security and green growth. The Paris Climate Agreement asks from each country nationally determined contributions, which are non-binding yet important commitments by countries to mitigate climate change. Last year, Armenia renewed its nationally determined contributions. In our region, Armenia and Georgia are the two countries that have taken up such voluntary commitments. Armenia already uses about 80% of its available hydroelectric power resources, and in the energy balance of Armenia, hydropower amounts to more than 30%, which keeps our carbon footprint considerably low. Our goal is to make the share of solar energy 15% of the total energy production by 2050, and to make the share of zero emissions power generation 54% of the total power generation. There is one particular legislative development that I'm very much looking forward to. It is the provision of access to power grids for small-scale producers, including consumers who have both solar and wind power generating plants to meet their own needs to sell electricity in the market. One last comment would be that I see my country's democratic development and green energy as two interconnected agendas and in opposition with authoritarianism, petrodollars, and conflict perpetuation. This is especially important in view of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in the South Caucasus. Green economy cannot cover up the destruction caused by Azerbaijan's petrodollars and the weapons it has bought. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Karas, you have the floor.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. От имени делегации Беларуси позвольте поблагодарить координатора экономической и экологической деятельности ОБСЕ за организацию нынешнего форума по такой актуальной теме, как экономическое восстановление на постпандемийном этапе и возможность выступить на этом заседании. Для Республики Беларусь, как страны с высокой степенью открытости экономики, торговли и транспорт является важным драйвером экономического развития. Беларусь не закрывала свою экономику во время пандемии, что позволило достаточно плавно пройти наиболее острые фазы этого масштабного эпидемиологического кризиса. К сожалению, несмотря на острую необходимость консолидации международных усилий по восстановлению экономики после разрушительного воздействия COVID-19, мы остаемся свидетелями углубления разделительных линий на пространстве ОБСЕ, применения мер экономического принуждения, противоречащих нашим общим обязательствам. На протяжении месяцев на Беларусь оказывается массированное внешнее давление с применением широкого спектра дискриминационных мер. Введение против Беларуси секторальных экономических санкций затронули целый ряд отраслей, нарушая социально-экономические права сотен тысяч работников. В отношении моей страны введены авиационная блокада, санкции против национальных авиаперевозчиков, включая Белавиа. Это беспрецедентный шаг, противоречит основополагающим международного права нормам и сфере международной гражданской авиации и международному праву. Торговые ограничения в отношении одного из крупнейших производителей калия, Беларусь Калий, уже привели к негативным последствиям для мирового рынка. Существенно выросла стоимость калийной продукции, потери несут зарубежные фермерские хозяйства и производители сельхозхозяйственной продукции, многие из которых столкнулись с реальной угрозой разорения. Замечу, что все это происходит на фоне острого продовольственного кризиса, климатических изменений, роста цен на продукты питания, сохранена проблема голода в ряде регионов мира. От санкций страдают обычные граждане, наносится непоправимый ущерб интересам бизнеса, не только белорусского, что особенно пагубно в условиях необходимости экономического восстановления на постпандемийном этапе. В заключение позвольте подчеркнуть, что Беларусь всецело поддерживает усилия, направленные на развитие экономического, экологического измерения ОБСЕ и задействование его значительного потенциала для укрепления нашей общей безопасности, который, как известно, нельзя укрепить за счет безопасности других. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much. And before giving the floor to Mark Weiser from the USA delegation, I would like to give the floor to Ms. Siv Mosleth, the head of delegation of Norway. Thank you very much. You have the floor.
Dear colleagues, thank you all for the speech. It's very important to achieve the climate goal, and we need to do it in a way that people understand and support. I will also like to underline the point about how important the agriculture is in the new Green Deal. From Norway, we believe an important task must be to bring forward the message of the Arctic climate change, how the global temperatures is increasing, how they're fundamentally changing the Arctic region with melting ice and thawing permafrost, and how the Arctic development is influencing the global climate change, including sea level rise. There is a need to inform people of the fact that Arctic is more than ice, beautiful landscapes and polar bears. There are 4 million people living there. 9% of the Norwegian population live north of the Arctic Circle. Modern cities and societies, good universities and thriving economies are also a part of the Arctic. I know because I have my home there. Furthermore, there is a need to convey the message that the Arctic is a well-regulated area in international law. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea applies to the Arctic Ocean, even if some of it is covered with ice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I've been told by the Secretariat that we have problems of connection with the member of the delegation of the United States. So I would like to give the floor to Mr. Pavel Fedyaev from the Russian delegation. Mr. Fedyaev, you have the floor, and I will call Mr. Turul Garanjaliyev from the delegation of Azerbaijan. Thank you very much.
Добрый день, уважаемые коллеги. Прежде всего, я бы хотел обратиться к энергетическому кризису, который сейчас происходит в Европе. Основа экономики Европы, хотим мы того или нет, это дешевое производство электроэнергии и параллельно безопасное для окружающей среды. И именно газ из Российской Федерации может это обеспечить. Как бы ни предпринимались попытки обвинить именно Россию в энергетическом кризисе в Европе, мы обязаны отметить, что сегодня стоимость газа по газопроводам в разы ниже, чем рыночная спотовая цена. Россия продолжает выполнять свои обязательства, несмотря на то, что могла бы, наверное, но никогда этого не делала, использовать ситуацию для получения дополнительной выгоды, как это делают другие крупные производители газа в мире. Просим обратить на это внимание. Мы всегда говорили о том, что готовы выполнять свои обязательства, не используем данную ситуацию как механизм воздействия. И в данном кризисе мы в очередной раз это подтвердили. Просьба обратить на это внимание и еще раз осмыслить. Лицензирование Северного потока-2 является и направлено на пользу Европы, или нелицензирование направлено ей во вред. Огромное спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pere. I give now the floor to Mr. Tural Anjalive from Azerbaijan. You have the floor.
Thank you, dear Chair, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank you for discussing this very important issue. And I want to say that everyone deserves to live in a safe and healthy environment. With the global impact of environmental catastrophes becoming increasingly pronounced these days, it's important more than ever to unite around the issue of preserving and protecting our environment, and switching to the clean energy is the best way forward to achieve this goal. Clean energy is the kind of energy that comes from renewable, zero-emission sources. The main goal is to keep the atmosphere clean. Currently, a clean energy revolution is happening all around the world, including the OSCE region. However, the speed and efficiency of the process should constantly be monitored to assure the best possible result. Ladies and gentlemen, following the liberation of Azerbaijan's Karabakh region, all Azerbaijani people were shocked by the level of destruction, herbicide, and ecocide committed during the occupation by Armenia. Homes of about 1 million displaced Azerbaijanis, their gardens, forests, and the whole ecosystem was destroyed. Now, as Azerbaijan is rebuilding its liberated territories, which is about the size of Lebanon, we are committed to use only green energy and use the smart urban planning to reduce the carbon footprint. Only electric cars, for example, will be allowed in the city of Shusha, which is my hometown and which is the cultural capital of Azerbaijan. Moreover, Azerbaijan is taking measures to develop the Karabakh region into the green energy zone. In this regard, the country's, for example, Energy Ministry and British Petroleum have signed an implementation agreement to build a solar power plant in the liberated territories of Azerbaijan. And as many of you know, Azerbaijan is rich with hydrocarbon resources, and we will do our best to use these resources in order to increase the clean energy environment and to help the OSCE region also in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tural. And now, before giving the floor, try to give the floor to Mark Vesey from the US delegation. I call Mr. Kyriakos Hadjiani, Special Representative on Civil Society Engagement, member of delegation, Cyprus. You have the floor, Kyriakos.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to congratulate the rapporteur, Frau Kugler, and for the excellent ideas, and also for the report with all the aspects of the energy. And I want to import the term of energy democracy. This transition should be done with social, participatory, local, and democratic parameters. It is imperative to involve civil society in consultation, decision-making at both local and national level by ensuring the principle of transparency and the principles of the rule of law. Locality in the design and implementation of the green transition should be strengthened. And I want to please Ms. Kugler, to include it in your report, if you, of course, if you agree. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kyriakos, and I really would like to underline this idea of energy democracy. I think it's important for the debate. And now I would like to give the floor to Mark Baser from the US delegation. Mark, you have the floor. So it seems that still we have problems. If you don't mind, I would like to give the right to reply to Turkey delegation, to Mehmet Said Kirazoglu. I would like to underline that you have only 1 minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, Mr. President. Well, first of all, about the tragedy that is going on in Ukraine, I wish it will be over as soon as possible. And the territorial unity and integrity of Ukraine is important to us and is supported by us. In Cyprus, because of the international agreements, Turkey is enjoying its right as a guarantee, and Turkey has ended the tragedy on the island. And since 1974, on the island, there has been no issues and problems on the island, and Turkey's position in Cyprus, and also the open open attacks at Ukraine. This is just distorted because of international law. Turkey, in fact, is using its right to its own exclusive economic zone. It is going to continue its exploration for hydrocarbon sources in the Eastern Mediterranean. It is going to continue preserving the legitimate rights of its citizens and the.
Thank you very much for your intervention. And this concludes the list of speakers under this agenda item. And I would like to ask dear Gudrun, dear Igli and Katarzyna, if you would like to reply to some of the points which have been raised. And I think I would like to start with Katarzyna, or some remarks, 1 minute, 1 minute and a half, because we are a little bit late.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. This is a very important forum. We've been listening a lot of very valuable interventions. I think that the topics mentioned by the particular parliamentarians are very similar to our priorities. So let me stress energy security, climate change, footprint, climate neutrality are among those which pop up during this discussion. And I really think that we have a lot in common. So Polish chairmanship is really looking forward to our joint cooperation during our year of chairmanship, and really appreciate also your commitments here in the second dimension. Thank you very much.
Ambassador.
Mr. Chair, thank you so much for this opportunity to engage with the distinguished parliamentarians. I think I have profited a lot from this debate. I'm looking forward to work with you and the rapporteur, but also other colleagues. And let's continue this excellent engagement. Thankful to the fact that we are probably coming to the normality of at least meeting in physical presences again. Very much appreciated, and again, thank you.
So then, thank you all the speakers. Thank you for the time, and I think I would like to just to go to the next step, but I would like to give the floor to Gudrun. Okay, Gudrun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to thank all of my colleagues for all the ideas that were presented, the general ideas and also the very detailed ideas. I will do my very best to reflect your thoughts in my report. And I do ask you, if something else comes to your mind and it's important for your delegation that you could not raise today, maybe also because the time was short, please do not hesitate to contact me. I look forward to very close cooperation with all of you.
So thank you, Gudrun, and I only would like to say last word on the idea of the idea of catalyzed change as a parliamentarians, and to catalyze, as I think Kyriakos mentioned, a fair change, and we have to do it now, and we have to do it all. So thank you all for the interventions. Thank you for being connected, and I would like to move to the next item on the agenda, which is also key. And if you don't mind, I think there is someone raising the. You want the floor, Kyriakos, for one minute? No, 10 seconds. 10 seconds. 10 seconds.
Yeah, it's enough actually. Just to give an answer. This is exactly the same what Russia today do in Ukraine. Military invasion, occupation, use of military forces, and it was exactly the same case 48 years ago by the invasion of Turkey in Cyprus. Occupation, using of military forces, and until today we have the invasion and the international status quo there. Every day is evaluation.
Kyriakos, you were using more than 10 seconds. Thank you very much. And
a violation of human rights and the rights and the freedoms of the normal inhabitants there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kyriakos. And then I think it's time to move to the next agenda item. And if you don't mind, I go to the next point. So let me just start with the ideas, dear colleagues, about trafficking in human beings concerns all OSCE participating states. And you also know that it touches especially women and victims, especially. So in 2003, the OSCE set up the office and post of a special representative and coordinator for combating trafficking in human beings to help participating states develop and implement effective policies. And today we have the pleasure to welcome Mr. Valiant Ritchie, OSCE special representative and coordinator for combating trafficking in human beings, to learn more about his experience and work. Mr. Ritchie, thanks again for accepting our invitation. I'm keen to hear your views about how human trafficking is intervening with our modern economies and what the office is doing in this field and how legislators can help. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much for organizing this special debate today. Within the global anti-trafficking conversation, this topic is indeed very timely. And as I think Madam Rapporteur Gudrun Kugler said at the beginning of this session, it is still crucial, despite all of the things going on right now, to work on these issues to ensure a sustainable future. In fact, on this topic that we're going to address today, we've seen more action in the last year than in the previous decade, and I think it will be highly relevant to all of you who are listening today and to your countries. So I'm delighted to see the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly taking a leadership role on discussing these issues. Honorable members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, the advent of a globalized economy has meant that goods and services are regularly sourced from all corners of the globe through far-reaching supply chains. However, there is a growing risk, indeed a reality, that many of these goods and services are produced by victims of human trafficking and forced labor. In fact, because of the complexity of global supply chains right now, we all, governments, businesses, and individuals are undoubtedly buying goods made with exploited labor. This leads to several problems. First, clearly a human rights problem, which places it squarely within the OSCE's mandate. There are tens of millions of victims around the world, 1/3 of which are children. 1/3 are children. People deprived of their freedom and most basic rights, producing the technology we use, the food we eat, and the clothes we wear. Something is fundamentally broken in our economic system if it is based on the exploitation of the most vulnerable around the world. Second, forced labor is a major problem for businesses that play by the rules, legitimate companies that are undermined and put out of business by unfair competition. Let me ask, how can the businesses in your districts and in your countries be expected to compete with those who do not pay their workers? Trafficking is a major human rights violation, yes, but it is also so much more than that. It is an economic challenge impacting communities directly through the harms of trafficking and indirectly as a drag on healthy economic activity, which again places this topic squarely within the remit of this committee. Third, trafficking is a security challenge. It fuels organized crime, it drives instability, it undermines the rule of law, and it is different from other forms of trafficking like drugs, weapons, or wildlife because people are the product. So the security response to it must cope with human victims. These aspects are increasingly penetrating the world's conscience, and I believe we are coming to terms with the urgent need to tackle this issue systemically. So, what are the solutions on the table, and why is this important to parliaments? Because one of the most effective ways to disrupt and prevent human trafficking for forced labor is to eliminate the market for goods and services produced by human exploitation through informed and ethical purchasing. The concept is simple. To end forced labor, we need to stop paying for it. We need to promote these businesses that play by the rules rather than businesses that exploit children and vulnerable adults around the world, driving down costs and labor standards. There are several legislative tools parliaments can use to follow this principle, and you can see them on the slide right now. In general, laws that eliminate trafficking for forced labor and supply chains can be put into three broad groups. First, import bans. Second, reporting laws. And three, due diligence laws. Next slide, please. The first group, import bans, set trade restrictions on goods manufactured with forced labor. How does that work in practice? Border or customs authorities issue orders detaining import shipments of goods suspected of being produced by exploited labor, and then either return the goods or seize and forfeit them. The United States and Canada are two examples of countries that have these kinds of laws. In the United States, to release the withheld goods, importers must submit proof that the merchandise was not produced with forced labor. The second group, reporting laws, require businesses to disclose, if you could go to the next slide, please, require businesses to disclose the efforts they have undertaken to prevent and remediate certain types of human rights abuses in their direct operations and value chains. The United Kingdom Modern Slavery Act, for example, requires companies to prepare and publish an annual statement on the steps taken to assess and address modern slavery risks in their operations. The Australian Modern Slavery Act sets similar reporting obligations. At the EU level, the Non-Financial Reporting Directive requires companies with at least 500 employees to prepare a statement on the due diligence processes they have undertaken to address environmental risks, human rights, labor rights, and anti-corruption risks, all topics that have been mentioned today. Finally, if you could go to the last slide, thank you, that's it. Finally, the third type of laws, and probably the one with the greatest potential for driving change, are due diligence laws. Such laws require entities like governments or businesses to undertake efforts to identify exploitation in their supply chains and address it. In some cases, these laws also establish criminal liability or create avenues for affected individuals or groups to seek remedies for harm or prompt corrective action by the companies. A few examples. The Dutch Child Labor Due Diligence Law Act addresses a single issue, the prohibition of child labor. The French Duty of Vigilance Law is broader, requiring companies to identify and avoid violations of all internationally recognized human rights, violations of health and safety rights, and environmental damage. The German supply chain law, adopted just this last summer, also allows NGOs and trade unions to bring companies to court on their behalf. The trend right now, and this is why this is so timely for this committee to consider and for your parliaments, the trend right now is that countries are moving from softer reporting laws to more ambitious due diligence legislation. What that means is whether your country has a due diligence law or not, your companies will have to start paying attention to these issues. They may be suppliers to companies in those countries, or they might want to export into economies where those laws have been adopted. And right now, we are seeing the most policy momentum in the largest economies, as I have just outlined. For example, just 2 days ago, the European Union presented its due diligence plan, which will affect any company importing into the European Union, as well as those that would like to in the future. It will also affect many companies inside the European Union. The sooner countries start looking at these issues, the more they will be prepared for what's coming, and I assure you, it is coming. So where do we go from here? Against this diverse legislative landscape, each state will need to define its own approach, but will clearly need to do something. My office has developed significant experience on these matters and stands ready to support your parliaments and this committee in further considering these issues. In fact, just today, we released a short handout containing some of the points I've raised with you during this presentation, as well as other actions where parliamentary intervention can move us in the direction of finally ending, and I repeat, ending human trafficking and exploitation. Thank you very much for your consideration today.
Yeah, it's always that way.
Answer any questions or hear comments, and look forward to new opportunities
Right now.
in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you, dear Valiant, and I really appreciate these ideas of this shift, no, in fighting trafficking, and this idea of ambition. I think it's the time to be ambitious. I really appreciate these remarks, and we don't have a lot of time, but I go directly I would like to give now the floor to my dear colleague, Special Representative on Human Trafficking Issues, Congressman Christopher Smith. In our assembly, Mr. Smith has been a strong advocate for combating human trafficking since 2004. I look forward to his reflections. Congressman Smith, the floor is yours, and I will that we are out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank my good friend Val Ritchie for his extraordinarily effective contribution. You know, I'll be very brief, but I think it's important that some points be highlighted. In the year 2000, I authored America's historic and comprehensive law known as the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. It's one of 5 laws that I've written on human trafficking, but that one created a new massive whole of government approach and initiative to prosecute the traffickers, protect the victims, and prevent these gross violations of human rights in the first place. 3 years later, and on point with today's debate about supply chains, I authored the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2003, and that included a provision that directed the President of the United States to, quote, and this is from the law, ensure that any federal grant, contract, or cooperative agreement shall include a condition that authorizes the federal department or agency involved to terminate the grant, contract, or agreement without any penalty if the grantee or any sub-grantee of the contractor is involved with human trafficking. Every contract contains a due diligence provision that requires the top management of the corporation to sign on the bottom line that they understand that if they're selling a product to the US government and they are complicit in trafficking, we can take away that contract. It really puts a sharp light on the fact that not only will people be held criminally liable, but they'll lose business. Governments, which are major purchasers of of goods and services, I should say, must lead by example. We do believe over the last 20 years, this initiative has made a difference. We also expanded rules, including the Federal Acquisition Regulation, ending trafficking in persons, or FAR as we call it. And that too, it put more emphasis on making sure that every part of the human trafficking debacle and the abuse when it comes to contracting is part of our effort, because we are, again, major buyers of goods and services. In 2019, I authored another law named after Frederick Douglass, the great anti-slavery abolitionist who himself was a slave, working with his great-great-grandson, who I brought to one of our parliamentary assemblies. You might recall, some of you, who gave a great speech about prevention of trafficking. And that law also put more teeth in our ability to hold people accountable if they are complicit in any way with China. With trafficking. On China, back in 1992, after Tiananmen Square, I went to a gulag, they call them Laogai, who formed through labor camps, which is a terrible description because it does not, these are concentration camps. And they were making goods with Tiananmen Square activists, about 40 of them, got some of the goods that they were making during that tour, and we got an import ban on it. Val just mentioned that the United States has a law, it's called the Smoot-Hawley Act, that for decades has said we will not buy gulag-made goods. The big problem has always been origin and being able to have on-site inspections to ensure that the goods are not being made with slave-like or slave labor. That is the hardest part. And because we had, Frank Wolf and I and other congressmen, actual products that they were sending to the United States and Europe, we brought it to the customs director here in the United States, and he put an import ban on all of it. And that gulag actually closed down because they were making things for export, making money for the Chinese Communist Party, and all of a sudden they couldn't do business anymore. We just passed a law, and I was one of the prime sponsors of it, that creates a presumption of guilt for anything coming out of Xinjiang, where obviously a horrific genocide is occurring against the Muslims, the Uyghurs, and others in that region. We have no access to those factories. And yet all these goods are coming here to the United States. They're going to Europe as well. So we now have a ban. Any company that wants to bring a product from Xinjiang has to prove beyond any reasonable doubt that it is not made with gulag labor, because there is no transparency when it comes to the Chinese Communist Party. I would point out to my colleagues that back in 2015, I offered a resolution that I called Responsibility to Combat Human Trafficking in Government Contracts for Goods and Services. And it was adopted by the Parliamentary Assembly, and I'm grateful that you did. So we laid out a prescriptive set of ideas that hopefully you can take a look at. But again, I think as Val said, this stuff isn't rocket science. It's not that hard to do. And it goes due diligence, import bans. And then again, the biggest buyers of goods and services in many countries, our government certainly is here in the United States, we got to make sure we're not complicit unwittingly or in any other way with this human trafficking. So I really encourage all of you to enact, or through regulations in your own parliament or through your executive branch, parliamentary system, whatever it might be, make sure that everything you buy, to the greatest extent possible, is not made with forced labor. And that can be done. Again, we can't be perfect with any of this, but that can be done, I believe, with regulations like we've done and a law that we did, again, that I wrote back in 2003. It has made a difference. So thank you so very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Val. And Gudrun, good to see you again, an old friend going back many years. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Congressman. And I think it's a clear message that we have to accelerate and to fight this situation of labor and trafficking. So let's go to the debate. We have a lot of people who ask for the floor. And before giving the floor to Miss Heidi Fry, I would like to call Ms. Malika Karanikov, member of the Delegation of Uzbekistan. She's going to start. Thank you. You have the floor. You want to start.
Уважаемый председатель, уважаемые коллеги, дамы и господа, я очень рада присоединиться к вам и хотела поблагодарить основных докладчиков за очень интересные и содержательные выступления. Как отметили основные докладчики, на самом деле торговля людьми остается актуальной проблемой для государств Центральноазиатского региона, в том числе и для Узбекистана. Хотела бы отметить, что при активной поддержке международной и гражданской общественности, в том числе при содействии ОБСЕ, у нас в республике была завершена работа по формированию соответствующей нормативно-правовой базы.
Правоохранительные органы страны сконцентрировались на противодействии транснациональным преступным группам. С этой целью были подписаны 29 договоров и соглашений с иностранными государствами о противодействии организованной преступности, в том числе в борьбе с опасными формами торговли людьми. Еще хотела отметить, что у нас в стране успешно функционирует Национальная комиссия по противодействию торговли людьми и принудительному труду под председательством председателя Сената Али Маилиса Республики Узбекистан. Как отметили выше, что при осуществлении крутого поворота по борьбе с торговлей людьми, думаю, роль парламента особенная, и важно осознавать, что данная проблема является транснациональной, что требует тесного взаимодействия заинтересованных сторон. Еще раз хотела подтвердить, что Узбекистан заинтересован в дальнейшем развитии международного сотрудничества в деле окончательного искоренения фактов торговли людьми. Пользуясь случаем, хотела бы пригласить уважаемых парламентариев на саммит женщин, который состоится осенью текущего года. Благодарю всех за внимание. Thank you. Mrs. Fry has the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. Let's call this what it is. I'm happy to speak to this issue, but let's call it what it is. It's modern form of slavery. And I think we need to look at some of the statistical data here. We know that 25 million people globally were victims of forced labor. We know that many of them are children and many of them are men and many of them are women. But it's interesting to note that 38% of adult men are in forced labor, 26% of women, and 21% of boys and 15% of girls. That is a horrendous set of statistics. And over the last 15 years, we have seen that the number of men in forced labor has increased greater than any one of the other groups. And these men are nearly always working in physically demanding jobs, fisheries, draining, construction work, etc. Women in forced labor tend to be trafficked for domestic service, and they are exposed to sexual, physical, and psychological abuse in many of those jobs. But the working conditions in forced labor is horrifying. And I wanted to talk about that. But I wanted to also say that, people keeping illegal passports, keeping people's passports, forcing them to live in these forced labor conditions. But I think what is most important is what we heard earlier on today. We have an opportunity as the PA to actually move forward on this. We got to raise awareness in government, create legislation, but we also have to do public awareness because consumers need to understand what kind of product that they're buying and immediately begin to stop working with them. I know Canada has moved clearly to talk about child abuse in supply chains, and we have also taken action to look at some of the issues of implementing the legislation we talked about, due diligence measures, requiring mandatory supply chain disclosure by certain corporations. But parliamentarians must demand and enforce and investigate and convict the traffickers. This is an exploitative industry, and the traffickers tend to get away with it. And I think we need to talk about how our country can work together, because the thing about forced trafficking and forced labor is that it is a cross-border problem. So I want to thank you for being able to talk about this, and I'm hoping that as parliamentarians, we will actually be able to take steps in working together to deal with this slavery. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And before I give the floor to Maria Karapetian from Armenia, now the floor to Mehmet Kiracoglu from Turkey.
Teşekkürler Sayın Başkan.
Responding to Mr. Hajiani, the JSC, in one single sentence, if your remarks are not some open and obvious perversion and distortion, then they are the product of complete ignorance. Turkey did exercise and is exercising its rights originating from international law. Mr. Chair, distinguished colleagues, in fact, the uncontrolled migrations around the world are at a very large scale, and millions of people are continuing to move beyond the borders due to ongoing wars, instabilities, and pressures. And the drought to come with the climate change is going to make these numbers even bigger. Due to its geographical position and location connecting the departure and destination countries, Turkey, in fact, encounters a high number of irregular migrants, and currently it is hosting the highest number of refugees, and we are hosting a number of refugees that is well beyond the limit of our capacities. So we are, in fact, trying to contribute to the initiatives that address the problems arising from irregular migration, and we are also trying to keep our determined stance in preventing cross-border crimes, including human trafficking in and around our borders. But you know, if we simplify the issue of migration and if we criminalize it, then we can really miss the humanitarian aspect and the fundamental reasons of migration and asylum seeking. Closing the borders and building barriers or repatriating the migrants and refugees, in fact, are seen to be unacceptable methods of dealing with and coping with the irregular migrations. And more than 80,000 regulars that were pushed back by degrees. We know what happened to, and in fact, many refugees, in fact, got frozen and lost their lives on the border, you know. And these methods, in fact, are not very effective, even in anti-smuggling. So, in fact, closing the borders or calling to refugees as illegal population movements will not relieve any country from its obligations stemming from international law. And also ill-treatment and inhuman treatment to the migrations will, and their illegal repatriation will never be accepted. If we can cope with the fundamental reasons in the countries, then in fact we can reduce people's tendency to leave their homes, and we can promote safe and voluntary returns. In fact, Turkey made sure that about 500,000 refugees went back to Syria, and with the initiative that we took in Idlib, we eliminated a new wave of migration without any discrimination and exclusion. In fact, I would like to reiterate that we are committed to our international obligations and our commitment to protect human rights and human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, I will remind you that we have to respect the time. Now I give the floor to Ms. Karapetyan, member of the Delegation of Armenia. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Pons. Dear colleagues, I would like to thank Mr. Ricci for his presentation, and especially for the examples of legislation needed to be adopted by the countries. I also thank Congressman Chris Smith for his tireless and consistent work on the topic of combating human trafficking. I want to share a glimpse of what Armenia has done in the sphere of preventing human trafficking and providing services to victims. In my view, the most important change in the last 2 years has been that Armenia has doubled the state budget on the program for rehabilitation of victims of human trafficking, exploitation, and sexual violence. This program covers hotlines, shelters, medical care, legal services, psychological and counseling assistance, and basic education. I also would like to share the data we have for 2021 to better communicate the situation in Armenia. In 2021, 31 cases were reported and treated regarding human trafficking and exploitation in Armenia. This included 6 men and 25 women, among them also several children. 24 of these cases were cases of sexual exploitation, and 7 were cases of labor exploitation. With this being the current data, Armenia will continue to better its legislation and structures to prevent human trafficking and provide better rehabilitation services, and contributing to the global effort of ending human trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have three more steps before ending, three more Parliament. So I start with Ms. Ida Glanzmann-Hunkeler, member of the Delegation of Switzerland.
Besten Dank, Herr Vorsitzender. Besten Dank, geschätzte Damen und Herren. Der Krieg in der Ukraine macht uns heute sehr betroffen. Dennoch finde ich es wichtig, dass wir heute auch über den Menschenhandel diskutieren können. Der Menschenhandel ist Teil einer globalisierten Welt. Er findet einen fruchtbaren Boden in den schwächsten Sicherheits- und Wirtschaftskontexten. Je ärmer die Länder, desto leichter ist es, für illegale Netzwerke oder einzelne Menschenhändler ihre Opfer zu rekrutieren. Die Ziel- und Transitländer der Opfer sind hingegen in den meisten Fällen Industrieländer. Menschenhandel ist eines der am schwersten zu entdeckenden Verbrechen. Er findet im Verborgenen statt, wobei sich die Opfer in einer besonders schutzbedürftigen Lage befinden. Da sie zum Schweigen verurteilt und unsichtbar sind, ist ihre Identifizierung in Ermangelung von Beweisen und Zeugenaussagen besonders schwierig. Daher ist es auch schwierig, ihre Zahl zu beziffern. Aber machen wir uns nichts vor. Neben dem Drogen- und Waffenhandel ist der Menschenhandel eine der lukrativsten Aktivitäten des organisierten Verbrechens. Jedes Jahr soll er weltweit einen geschätzten Umsatz von 32 Milliarden US-Dollar generieren. Darüber hinaus stellt dieses Verbrechen eine Finanzierungsquelle für bewaffnete Konflikte oder gewalttätigen Extremismus dar. Unsere Staaten sind angesichts dieser Problematik, die grenzüberschreitender Natur ist, miteinander verbunden. Die Bekämpfung des Menschenhandels gelingt uns nur, wenn wir uns in unseren Parlamenten, aber auch unseres internationalen Austauschs genau hier wie in der OSZE gemeinsam mobilisieren. Danke.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Ms. Amina Ghazadeh from Azerbaijan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the most significant events of the last year was the approval of the fourth National Action Plan to combat trafficking in human beings in the Republic of Azerbaijan. Having adopted the fourth National Action Plan to combat trafficking in human beings, Azerbaijan reaffirmed its commitment to continue institutional reforms in this area and support the efforts of the world community. Today, in accordance with the new National Action Plan, systematic work is carried out to ensure prompt detection of facts of trafficking in human beings and forced labor, identification and prosecution of perpetrators, protection of victims and their reintegration into society, as well as in other important areas in cooperation with relevant state authorities and civil society institutions. According to the recent UN report, while there are certain trafficking victims per 100,000 inhabitants in the world, in our republic, this rate is 1 person. These and other achievements are also the result of major efforts made by the state for maintaining the rate of economic development in the country, sustainable improvement of employment and living standards. At the same time, there is a lot to be done in combating trafficking in human beings. The goal for the coming year are to further increase the effectiveness of criminal prosecution, operation, and search activities. And also, the issue of missing person needs to be addressed expeditiously in accordance with the exciting international standards and relevant commitments. The whereabouts of 4,000 Azerbaijan citizens who went missing due to the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan in 1992-1994 need to be clarified in accordance with international humanitarian law. Many of these people were used as slaves and involved in human trafficking. And international community needs to exert pressure on Armenia to cooperate on this important matter. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And then we go to the last speaker, Mr. Joe Wilson from the US delegation. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And ladies and gentlemen, I believe that we as parliamentarians can and should do more to address human trafficking and labor exploitation in the global supply chains. The governments have such an important role in combating human trafficking in supply chains. The procurement supply chains are enormous, and we can ensure that we do not purchase goods and services that have human trafficking or labor exploitation in their supply chains. In the United States, we have the Federal Acquisition Regulation Act, which provides for ending trafficking of persons, which strengthens protections against trafficking of persons in federal contracts. We welcome that the OSCE was one of the first international organizations to address human trafficking and its own procurement supply chains, and I would be interested to hear if the Parliamentary Assembly has taken similar steps. Governments can also model and encourage partnerships with the private sector. Governments should also set clear expectations for businesses on human rights and adopt policies that promote greater transparency and better reporting in anti-trafficking in supply chains, as has been achieved by President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine. And we can use legislation to target particular human rights abuses and concerns, as has been successfully done by Congressman Chris Smith in South Carolina and by Attorney General in my home state, Attorney General Alan Wilson of South Carolina. Over the last years, China has forced ethnic Uyghurs and other ethnic and religious minorities in Xinjiang province into detention camps and are subjected to forced labor. In the United States, we've addressed this with legislation, and increasingly we are identifying companies that are violating the regulations. As we look forward to working together to address this heinous crime, with the lawful president of Belarus, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya, Belarus can be a leader. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And just would like to underline before giving the floor that you mentioned the idea of the stakeholders, the participation of all stakeholders, the idea of modern slavery, the idea of public awareness, the links between migration and trafficking, the idea that we are in front of a global international problem, the idea of that these people are invisible, the reintegration in society, which is very interesting to me, and the last speaker, the role of government. So dear Val, Chris, how we can reply, could you reply to these ideas, and what do you think about the intervention? I think they were interesting. Val, can you start, please?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think the first point you just made really well, which is that we've discovered that human exploitation intersects with so many different aspects of our society. Ms. Fry raised this, that it has penetrated so many sectors of our economy and therefore requires a comprehensive response. Now we are also learning that it intersects with environmental degradation. We're finding that people who are exploited often have, for example, higher levels of toxins in their body because they are also exploited in an environment where environmental harms are being committed. This is telling us that we really do need a comprehensive response. So let me say this in closing. In the last 20 years, almost every country in the world has adopted a law criminalizing trafficking. And I think we thought that the step now that was needed was simply implementing that. What we are realizing is that our work is not done, that we need new laws to address the comprehensive nature of this problem. And this is why I'm talking to the Parliamentary Assembly. I tell you, your work is not done. You have opportunities to make beautiful progress in combating human exploitation and sustaining modern economies. And this brings us to the point you raised at the beginning of this meeting, Mr. Chair. It requires political will. And this is where parliaments can play a crucial role in advancing us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Val. And Chris, you want to intervene? So
just muted. You should unmute his microphone.
You should unmute your mic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for presiding over this very important debate. Val, thank you for your leadership and all those who have participated and those who didn't speak but are doing great things back home. It comes down to redoubling our efforts, training procurement officers, having a law in place or a regulation or regulations in place to make sure that we are in no way complicit in buying goods and services that have any element of trafficking affixed to them. And frankly, we have found over these years, again, I wrote the law in 2003 on this very idea of procurement, and there were gaps. When we did an oversight, we found that there were big gaps that they weren't, some people weren't taking it seriously. So training of procurement officers within our governments is very important. The due diligence idea, making sure that our corporations, your corporations in Europe, our corporations, multilateral corporations, take this seriously and don't just do it a check in the box and say, been there, done that, and got the t-shirt. I mean, that is so often the problem with human rights observance. We don't, those of us who are part of this parliamentary assembly don't take that view, but far too many people just think, well, we have a little due diligence, at least it looks like it, and that's enough. Just think of the victim. One of the things that we got back in 1999, I offered the first resolution at the Parliamentary Assembly in St. Petersburg, Russia, on human trafficking. While there, my wife, Marie, and I met with several women who have been trafficked. They have been saved by an NGO called Miramed. And frankly, you look in their eyes and see the pain and agony that they have dealt with and take, they have a PTSD, a post-traumatic stress that's very real, and agony that they live with, whether it be forced labor or sex trafficking. And you got to just get in their shoes. And then that, I think, further encourages us, mobilizes us to be very serious about this. We need good laws. I think we have very good laws in the United States. I think so many of you have great laws as well. But supply chains is still that one area where we haven't done enough. All of us. And, so I hope that we can do that going forward. So I thank you again. If anybody wants to look at our legislation, our laws, we would share every bit of it, share best practices. That's what we all need to learn from each other, and share those with me as your special representative for the Parliamentary Assembly on Trafficking and with Val, so that we can continue, get everybody on the same page, so that we can combat this heinous crime of human trafficking. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for this. And again, I want to make a strong appeal to all of you, if you would, to consider a law that would ban anything coming out of Xinjiang, put the presumption on that it was made by forced labor until it's proven otherwise. We have no way of ascertaining what's going on in the factories throughout all of China, but in Xinjiang, it is especially egregious case because what they're doing to the people there is genocide. And so maybe consider that as well. I'm looking to introduce a new bill very shortly that would reinstate linkage of human rights with trade with the Chinese Communist Party. We had that in 1984, 94, I should say, 1994. It was delinked, unfortunately, by Bill Clinton, which I thought was a serious mistake. And then, the Chinese Communist Party said they care more about profits than human rights. So I do hope that everybody will do their very best on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Valiant, for your contribution. Thank you to all for the contribution you made. We have to close the session, and I would like to finalize thanking the interpreters for the work, for all the ones who were connected to the internet. And I would like to say, I would like to close this session saying that we are all with the population of Ukraine. We were all concerned during the whole day, but still we have to keep going and to work also and think about the items which are also on the day-to-day life of others, of the citizens of this region, the region which is the OSCE. Thank you very much, and thank you also to the team for all the work they have done for this session. Thank you very much.